Welcome back to Block by Block for our second episode in our mini-series focused on how to make a real-world impact and build a more inclusive financial system. I'm your host, Danelle Dixon, CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation. In our last episode, we heard from Rick Martin of mobile wallet Decaf about the work that he and the team are doing, building trust with end users, increasing access to financial services for people around the world that haven't had access to traditional financial services, or what is available to them has created serious challenges regarding and including risks to their lives. Today, we continue the conversation with an outstanding leader that I've been able to have wonderful conversations with about how to drive more financial inclusion. Mary Ellen Iskenderian, the President and CEO of Women's World Banking. In this episode, Mary Ellen helps us explore the topics of how access and inclusion are different. Both are very important, but require a different set of focus and set of tools. How women at the household level are making investment decisions that not only improve outcomes for the family, but also on a macro level drive GDP. How life-changing new approaches to credit scoring can be to driving financial inclusion, and to remember the long game of your work. Women's World Banking was established in 1979, and in the 40 plus years since, they have done outstanding work with the focus of a simple, lofty, and incredibly important mission: to expand the economic assets, participation, and power of low-income women and their households by helping them access financial services, knowledge, and markets. Mary Ellen joined Women's World Banking in 2006. Today, she leads its global team, partnering with financial institutions and with policymakers to drive systematic change and the bank's asset management business that invests in financial services providers to further their mission. Throughout her impressive career, she has been a leading voice for women's leadership and financial services and a passionate advocate for the global advancement of women's access to finance. Prior to Women's World Banking, she spent 17 years at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank, and had previously worked for the investment bank Lehman Brothers. She is a permanent member of the Council on Foreign Relations, serves as a director on the board of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council and of Milken's Africa Business Leaders Council. So let's get to the conversation. Mary Ellen, welcome, and thank you for joining us for our second episode in our Season 3 mini-series focused on the real-world impacts of a more inclusive global financial system. We're really excited to have you here and to join us for this topic. And I just want to say that you and I met when you did a roundtable, and I was graciously invited to attend, and you handled that roundtable so well because you spoke with every woman around the table about the impacts they had made that were about real world impacts. And I just thought it was really impressive because it's hard to do.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pretty good group of people on a topic that we all love. So I'll take the kudos, but it was actually really quite a joy.
All right. Well, we've had some really great conversations, and I'm excited to bring these conversations to Block by Block. We've talked a lot about the history and mission of the Women's World Banking a bit in the intro, but you and the team are involved in such a wide breadth of work, supporting more women and especially low-income women to get access to the financial system, which is a lot of what we care about at the SDF. A stat that was just put into perspective is that nearly 1 billion women in the world with no or limited access to formal financial services. And so women are a very impactful community. We've learned a lot about what women having this access can do. And the results are not only making a massive impact on women's lives, but it also benefits short-term and long-term for companies. So can you share how you're seeing that play out for women involved and why?
I'm so glad that you made that connection to the fact that it's really a very, very strong business case. And I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to talk it through with you. Because this is really in some ways like the challenge of my career, because we now have really solid data that show that really not just at the old microfinance, $100 loan that a woman makes in a group, but at every level of business, women are better repairs of credit. They are more frequent and more sort of sticky savings. So banks always have that, level of savings that they can count on. That's women's savings. They are going to be that loyal customer. We see client retention rates much higher for women. Women are 60% more likely to be a client of your financial institution 5 years after you've signed them up than a man is. A man is much more likely to rate shop or, value the relationship and the trust that's built in some ways less than that woman is. So women are really good clients for the financial sector. And that doesn't even touch on the equally forceful, powerful data we have on what happens both in that woman's life and in her own interactions, her own sense of her own self, but also to her family and her community. We know that when a woman has control over the way money is spent, she is much more likely than men to spend it on three main things. Number one, like way above everything else, is the education of her children. There's a lot of data that shows both girls and boys have better education outcomes when the women are making decisions around how money is spent in the household. Number two is healthcare for everybody in the household. Unfortunately, we often see that women deprioritize their own health.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, the others in the family are doing better health-wise if the woman's spending the money. And then the third is on improvements to the housing. And that can be as simple as the move from the mud floor to the wood floor, which has huge health benefits. We also see some really interesting data on nutrition. When a woman has control over finances and how family decisions are made around money, you see everybody in the family eating more nutritional food. So there's just really solid, and again, just completely evidence-based information. And so when you kind of have to make this case over and over and over again, it's a little perplexing, but
yeah.
I'd rather be on this side of it, making a great case with great data, than on the other.
Well, it's fascinating to me because I'll be honest and tell you that 5 years ago, I probably didn't have this at my fingertips. I recognized the importance of getting just even internet and access to just tools that a lot of us take for granted to women was a really, really important step. But then when I started looking at some of the World Bank data and recognizing that everything you just said, the education of the children, the healthcare, and then the improvements in housing, that's a direct line to improvement of the GDP of every country. And I think that to me is what is like we try to focus around that GDP improvement number because it's something that maybe will target those financial services institutions. But it is something that, you shouldn't have to make the case, but of course we constantly have to.
And just to say one more thing on that, and I'm so glad you brought the sort of the macro view to the table, because all too often we do maybe over index on the micro impacts. It was a really watershed moment when the IMF declared financial inclusion as a macro critical factor. For decades, the IMF was about financial stability, and that was the be all and end all of their mission. And then they really started to look at what inclusion actually does to stability, does to the ability of a government to communicate policy. If 3/4 of your population isn't included in the system that you're using monetary instruments to drive inflation or whatever, your policy is going to be a whole lot less effective. So I think that moment was a really critical shift in the conversation and the understanding of that macro impact you referred to.
Well, and I'm hopeful that shift actually plays out in terms of like how on a country by country basis, especially those countries that are hyper focused on increasing the GDP. I actually have to be honest and say that I haven't seen that be as much of a focus area that I'd like to see, but I have seen in some countries that there are smaller countries where they are focusing on getting control into the hands of the women so that they can control in terms of like the financial, getting them access to financial services so that they can do this. I want to see more of that because I feel like that's just empowering the whole family and bringing the country up in so many ways. So sticking with this idea of how to make an impact, we've always had these conversations around the importance of product development to promote financial inclusion. We focus a lot on access because that's sort of the SDS focus, but financial inclusion is a lot of what you focus on, and especially for low-income women. And you talk about bringing the bank to her. So can you share more about how you think about that? And the work that Women's World Banking is doing in this space to really focus on that, bringing the bank to her, and how it's different from what's been done historically.
So thank you so much for making that distinction between, access and usage. And
it's such an important distinction. And everybody talks about financial inclusion, and I'm always like, but wait, that is not our job. We're really good at access, and other people are really good at inclusion.
Right. Well, and we just, it's again sort of one of the frustrations of, the way financial inclusion has typically been measured has been, opening an account and how many accounts get opened. And that's, absolutely the first step, and how wonderful when we started measuring and counting, digital accounts, when we started looking at having an account in a mobile wallet as being included. But it's about how you use it and why you use it. And this is where the bringing the bank to her becomes so important, because, the vast majority of financial products are traditionally designed, by men to meet the needs that men have. One of the very first wallets that Women's World Banking ever worked on was a product that they sort of led with bill pay, which was great and is a great, sort of usage thing. But in this country, it was a Middle Eastern country, it was just very customary that men paid the electric bill. It was not a bill that a woman was responsible for. She covered other costs. Those other things weren't included in the menu of things that the woman could pay. So your usage by women, it's always so interesting. The take-up rates of, particularly digital financial tools tend to be very similar at the outset. And then where they fall off the customer journey is the indicator of whether this is actually meeting a genuine need. One of my absolutely favorite stories, and you'll forgive me for going on a little bit here, but I think it just touches on so much about what our assumptions are and what is actually underlying women's usage of a financial service. We were brought in by the largest mobile wallet in Pakistan a few years ago. And I'm convinced the only reason we were brought in was they had 12% of their clients were women, was because they had a woman CTO. And
sometimes that's the way to get in, and that's the way to take advantage of.
Exactly. And she had gotten sort of the sign off from her boss for a so-called pink product, something that was going to have, marketing around it that was supposed to be appealing to women. But when we looked at the data, and I can't emphasize enough, if you're going to collect data, you got to use it to make decisions. And when we looked at the company's data, those 12% women clients were using the same products. They were using the bill pay. They were using remittance products. They were using the exact same products at the same kind of values and volumes, and leading to similar profitability levels as men. But where the real issue was is this company's onboarding process was through, as many, many, many digital providers have a network of mobile agents, 97% of whom were men. And they were, small sort of kiosk shops. So in this really traditionally conservative environment, if a woman wanted to open an account with this company, she had to go into a shop alone with a man who wasn't her husband and then give him her cell phone number. So this just wasn't happening. So we were very fortunate that Unilever had built a network of nationwide women kiosk owners, and they had done a great job in picking women that were very trusted in the community, that already had, the husbands were completely bought into their women, shopping with this group of kiosks. We trained that group of women as banking agents for the company that we've been hired by. And we don't usually get results quite this remarkable, but like in 6 months, we went from 12% to 42%.
Wow.
There was so much pent up demand for these services, but the company just hadn't made them accessible in a way that, was usable in that cultural context for women.
Well, it sounds like in that case too, that was partly in the product itself in terms of like the drop down menu and the bill pay offering things that women could pay for.
Mm-hmm.
But also like making sure that you're creating an environment that makes it so that like just to even get into the product,
right.
Women can feel comfortable. I mean, I love that story. It's one of the things that you say, if you collect data, you should use it, especially for product innovation. It is one of the things, like I'm constantly about the funnel and where you see drop off and why, like why are you seeing that drop off?
Right.
So I love that. The part of what we're doing in this mini series is we're a lot focused on the why, which is what you've been talking about. But I'd love to hear you share more about the who, because I know as part of the Women's World Banking 45th anniversary, you're highlighting the stories of real women that feel the benefit of financial inclusion. So could you share your favorite story of who is seeing the real world impact of your work?
Well, without question, the highlight of my out and why I love doing what I do and why, being here in the office is not where I want to be. I really always want to be out with the clients if at all possible. But sort of the woman that will always and forever kind of say so sharply in my mind was one of the first clients I met. And I still, kind of to this day, I'm so grateful to the Women's World Banking Board that they even hired me, because I didn't have a particular focus. I'd worked for the World Bank or the IFC, the private sector arm of the bank, for 17 years in financial services. I never asked a single banker how many women he was lending to, how many women depositors, what were their repayment rates. Never asked a single one of those questions. And then, I come to Women's World Banking and it's so clear as soon as I go to the field. But I had gone to visit one of our oldest partners. It was a microfinance institution that had become a full-fledged bank in Kenya. Kenya actually has very good regulation of microfinance, and including now, digital finance. And we went to see her business, and it was a fully thriving, really quite sizable hardware store. And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, really busy, lots of construction folks coming in and buying what they needed for the day. And she took me back to her office and she showed me the photograph of her first business, because she and her husband had kind of settled in the town that her family was from, and he just couldn't get work that could support the whole family. So they were close to Mombasa, which is the second largest city in Kenya. He went to Mombasa and became a policeman, was sending money home, but it still wasn't really enough to support the whole family. And she had responsibility for the larger family as well. And so she just noticed how many people were doing home improvements. And the picture she showed me on her bulletin board was of this like little roadside shack, really. And she sold some loose nails, some very like repurposed 2x4s and, pieces of wood, some eggs and some tomatoes. And that was the hardware store. And she told me, it's almost like it was sort of almost scripted, but she told me her experience of going to a bank, to get a loan, and they wanted, 130% of the loan in collateral, and the collateral had to be land. And she was like, if I owned that land, I wouldn't be here looking for a loan. And it was just, everything about it was so prohibitive and so not structured for her life,
Right.
and her circumstances. And then somehow, word of mouth, she heard about this microfinance organization, Kenya Women's Finance Trust. She got a $70 loan, and this was 7 years before I had met her. And she now had a $3,000 revolving line of credit.
Wow.
They say she had a bank account. She herself said, she would always maintain that relationship, but that the introduction of M-Pesa a few years before I had met her was really life-changing. Being able to transact online, so much more convenient. Being able to pay Kenya Women's, online, that in itself was huge. It wasn't an all-day affair going to the next town where they had a branch to pay in cash. So she was very loyal to that institution, but recognized the importance of digital financial services. But the thing that I think stays with me so much about her is that she told me all of this, but the way she talked about the changes in her life and the impact that this had was all about, all of her kids had stayed in school and were going on to, the ones who'd been in elementary school went on to a secondary school, and then she had 2 kids who had graduated from high school going on to college. She had put her younger sister through graduate school. It was always in the context of education. And she was really proud, and we kind of toured back behind the store where her husband, she was making enough money that her husband had come home, and he was starting a lumber yard, and they'd gotten a contract from the municipality to build schools. And so he was providing the construction materials, and that was going to be sort of his business, and they were going to be able to, go into business together, and, were reunited at home. And just, the way all of that sort of fit together has just stayed, so strongly in my mind. And
I think it's so important.
And she's not the only woman that I've met over the years to tell that kind of story.
Well, that's what I think is so important, are these stories. I spend so much time with regulators and policymakers, and when you try to talk to them without those stories, it's just harder to understand the impact. We get to spend a lot of time talking about our ecosystem and the folks in our ecosystem that are doing this kind of work. And it is so much more empowering for us to be able to have that voice, but also to look at what that's done to the humans on the other side. Is it's something that people, like, you can actually visualize it and you can see it, and then it makes it more real. So I love that. I've heard you speak about the role of digital currency and and digital financial services, and to reach that last mile you just did in that story there, and low-income populations with digital financial services. So one stat that sort of speaks to that, which is a relatively new stat, is that crypto ownership by women in the US has surged from 18% a year ago to 29% at the beginning of 2024. So can you share the role that you think that digital financial services and maybe even DeFi services play in making that kind of an impact?
Well, certainly digital financial services, I am an enormous proponent of. I've seen in so many cases, again, we were talking before about access and usage, only 5% of most economies in the developing world are captured within the formal credit rating bureau.
Right.
And so having alternative credit scoring, having information about a woman's credit worthiness, and gaining access to credit through, through those alternative means is truly life-changing. And I think we need to be very, very careful and not have any illusions about over-indebting people with digital credit that isn't well regulated and isn't well monitored. But where it's done right, and we have lots of examples of companies that are looking to do it the right way. I think embedded finance has a huge role to play in women's financial inclusion and empowerment. So I think there's a great future for digital financial services sort of writ large. We are seeing, to use your words, surges in e-commerce. And if you think about it, women's businesses are much more likely to start out as being home-based businesses. If you're e-commerce, you can make that work from your home very, very easily. You need to get the payment processes, down right, but they are the lifeline to making these businesses really work for women. Where I have a little more skepticism, and we've talked about this, Danelle, is I worry about placing, some of the world's most vulnerable people into a currency that is still sort of finding its way and hasn't yet, found that level of stability. I know we run a training program for regulators from the global South, and they are very keen to understand not just, how do I create a CBDC? How do I regulate a stable coin? But how do I communicate the value of that stable coin to that low-income population who, they've made the transition to cell phone banking, but can they make that transition to, something that is even less tangible than the digital financial services?
Yeah, it's super interesting to me. I think that part of the reason why stable coins are so important is that if you, the US dollar stable coins are the ones that people want access to. But there's always we spend a lot of time with regulators in different parts of the world in the global South. And a lot of times, if you're converting that immediately as it enters into the user's wallet, they then, to cash out, they cash out in local currency. That actually creates this like virtuous goods cycle, or that can convert into a local asset that is like backed by the local currency. Those are ways to actually create and maintain stability in region, where you're also leveraging the digital asset and not putting financial services into the hands only of a few companies. Like the M-Pesa works just amazingly well, and yet it's not a government operated entity and has so much control over that. So there are definitely things that we see already really taking hold there. We're getting to the end of our time. I wanted to tweak a question. One of my favorite podcasts is called Wiser Than Me. And what she does on that is she says this question: what do you wish you could go back and tell yourself before you started leading the Women's World Banking, to maybe make it better, maybe make it easier, maybe get your head on differently? What is that one thing that you wish?
So this may be a little contradictory because, when I joined, so many people were so generous with advice. One of my board members made a coach available to me. And there was this, you have that first 100 days, and your first 100 days, have to be so important. And the signals you send during that short period of time. Yeah. I think I would have said, you're and I think I would have maybe reminded myself that this was a long game and been kind of more stern with myself a little bit. It's like, don't back down. You have big plans. You don't need to be short. You don't have to follow the short-termism just because, the first 100 days are going to come and go. I think
so. We lost you for a second there in the beginning, but I think I understood your point. Your point was that you would have told yourself, yeah, the first 100 days important, but I don't need to focus just on the first 100 days. I need to focus on
exactly.
Yeah. I think it is funny. I get all of the new employees. We have like 90-day check-ins, and I'm always like, it's okay that you don't have like your a whole thing planned out for you, like in the 90 days, because 90 days Not a long time. I'm so glad we were able to sit down. I love the work that you do. I love what you guys are doing globally. This is like just a phenomenal organization. People should look into this more and support this organization more. And I just have one last question. Where can people go to keep up with you and your work?
Oh, well, please follow us on social media. We have a growing LinkedIn presence. My social media head would love me to have a bigger Insta presence. And so I'd love you to find us there and really help us join a bigger Instagram community. Womensworldbanking.org is our is our website, and there's lots about us, but you and I didn't even touch. In addition to being a global NGO, we are a pioneer in the gender lens investment space with 2 funds where we invest directly in inclusive finance companies. And you can read about the work that we're doing as a shareholder and as a board member, and how we're driving capital towards these issues that we really believe in addition to all the other great work that we're doing as a nonprofit.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. Appreciate your time. And I want people to follow you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Great.
Thanks for joining us for this conversation on Block by Block. Another wonderful conversation with Mary Ellen. A couple of big conversation topics I will take away with me are the power of individual stories to really impact change and to bring that data to life, and the importance of product development's focus on the end user and removing barriers for those end users so they can actually really impact change for those individuals. Thanks again for joining. Our next episode, and the third and final in our mini-series on how to make a real-world impact, will be released on September 5th, where we will carry these themes and conversations forward. And don't forget to subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released, and follow me on Twitter to stay in the loop in between episodes. I'll talk to you next time.